what we have in Africa, or we have evidence which is much younger. And if it is equally old, what were similarities between African environment and Indian coastal environment? If there is a time gap between African and Indian, what were the environmental deterrents that came, in the way of early expansion of microlithic people? Why did they not come to coastal areas? Why they went inside the interior of the Indian subcontinent, and so on and so forth? So this microliths were invented. For a very long time, these microliths were thought to have been invented by Mesolithic people. Post-glacial, what we call the last ice age, came to an end around 13,000 years ago. And the global climate, like we enjoy today, came into existence around 13,000 years ago, and we still continue to enjoy. We even anticipating more warmer and humid conditions, and we have experienced a heavy monsoon this year, unusual monsoon. It's all because of warming conditions. So, whether this archaeologists thought that microliths were an invention to adapt to end of the glacial climate and the coming into existence the entirely different environment like we see today. During ice ages, major part of the continental area was covered by ice. Sea levels were very, very low, at least 150 kilometers away from where it is today. And the land continental area is much wider along the western coast or eastern, around the coastal areas, and then the rainfall affected, the distribution of rainfall affected the vegetation association along the west coast and so on. So these had to be looked at and see. Some people argue that yes, the continental shelf has submerged many older sites and so on. But then we had to look at the west coast geomorphology much more carefully and then see if these theories are valid or not and so on. So these time scales help us figure out how at different points of time, different regions of the world were supporting the incoming populations from outside, and how the ecosystems themselves were enabling the sustenance of the life phase of the people and so on. So as you can see here, the peninsular coast is very, very long, 5,400 and odd kilometers. If you include the coastline of the Andaman island and so on, it will increase more than 7,000 years. But this continuous coastline, west coast and east coast, nearly 5,400 kilometers. And there is a differential distribution of early settlements, Stone Age settlements, and from Kutch to Kanyakumari, that is our focus today. We see that the evidence for human settlements in some parts of the west coast is very, very old, and in major part of west coast is much younger, and so on and so on. Why is this differential, and what were the factors governing this differential distribution of ancient early Stone Age settlements along the west coast and so on? So the documented evidence is inadequate, and whether it is true, because this documentation is based on the force, archaeological force that is working in a particular area. If the force is very small, naturally many areas are left unsurveyed. So there are blanks. Whether they are blanks because there were no settlements, or there are blanks because the areas have not been surveyed. And these are some of the challenges we face. And the type of tools that we have found in some parts of the west coast are these typical stone tools. We call it a biface. This is a biface hand axe made from a type of rock known as quartzite. And this quartzite played a presence of quartzite played a very important role in attracting human populations, because the environment is favorable. But if the lithics, they made stone tools to be able to adapt. And if the stone that they use for making tools is not hard enough, the tool is of no use to them. Instead of performing a function, it breaks itself and it is put to use. So the use of hard rock and a fine-grained rock and a rock which gives conchoidal fracture. That is, when we study rock mechanics, if the stone rock has hardness 7 and it gives conchoidal fracture when it is struck with a hammer stone, that can lead to tractable rock, we call. So such large cutting tools, although we call it a hand axe or a cleaver, they are otherwise called large cutting tools. They were made from blocks of quartzite, cobbles of quartzite, or large flakes even detached from outcrops and so on. So